Hey guys, so it's been a little while since I made the last one of these videos. It's been like a month, I think, to be exact. So I kept saying I was gonna do this like every time I streamed. I was like, oh, I'm gonna make a video on Friday, spooky time. But now I'm actually doing it. I think what would be a good idea for this series, because last time I did it, people enjoyed it, is if I did it at least once a month, because although I do enjoy doing this, obviously my passions lie in playing games. So for the people that do enjoy this kind of content, where I read stories and stuff, I will keep making it, but just not as frequently as I play games. So I think that would be a good pace, probably the first Friday of each month. I think that's a good idea. So I hope you guys enjoy this, and thank you to all the people that give me credit to use your stories. I really appreciate it. Otherwise, these videos wouldn't be possible. And I mean, unless I just want to be a douchebag and take all the credit. But you get the gist of what I'm trying to say here. I hope you guys enjoy this, and peace out. As I was talking with my sister, all bored because of quarantine, I remembered an encounter I wish I could have avoided. So here it goes. I've lived in the same apartment complex since I was maybe 5 years old. I'm 23 years old now, so as you could guess, I encounter and talk with a lot of my neighbors. They literally saw me growing up. Honestly, most of the time I enjoy talking to them, petting their dogs. They would talk about their days, things like that. While the population living here is mostly old people and families, there was one guy, maybe in his 50s, that always gave me the creeps. He dressed relatively always the same way, the same brown cap, round glasses, cigar in the mouth, a backpack that seemed to reap all the misery in the world. There was always something eerie with him. I don't know, I always felt uneasy around the dude. But the thing is, he had some weird ways of interacting with people. And for example, if we meet, he would literally make eye contact and won't let go. He won't say anything and won't move out with his day until I would say hello. Then he would reply and just move on. Weird, but I told myself that it could be some type of obsessive behavior disorder, or something of the sort. I remember that my cousin, when we had slept over, won't be able to sleep until we all told her goodnight, and each and every one of us should say it in a specific order. If we didn't achieve it correctly, she wouldn't let go and keep asking us to repeat it again and again. The time it took us sometimes. Anyway, I digress. This took place when I was still young, maybe 12 or 13. I was walking and I saw him. He did our ritual by saying hello first so that he won't gape here while waiting for me to greet him. So I did, and here's how it went. Hello. Hello. Awkward silence. I then continued to head towards the entrance to my stairwell, but I feel like he is still looking at me. I turn around at this point. I stopped walking and was staring at him. Is there something wrong? No, I just like to see you walk. I was stunned. I flew the scene as fast as I could while trying not to be suspicious. I remember this time vividly, and I always told this story fervorously because I was reassuring myself by telling myself that nothing bad could have happened to me, since this happened in broad daylight. Oh, the lies we tell ourselves. The thing is, I never knew which floor he lived in, and I remembered my mom always warning me about him. Never go on the elevator alone with him, or at all for that matter. I was a little surprised to recollect these memories, and just remembering him at all. I always felt like something was off with him, and never felt like trying to dig in to find out why. As of today, he doesn't live here anymore, and honestly, I don't remember him moving out. I just at some point stopped seeing him around. And funny enough, I started noticing him not being around when I was an adult. So, to the creepy 50-something-year-old dude telling my 12 to 13-year-old self that he liked watching me walk and invasively staring at me while I was going home, let's not meet again. Let me tell you my story. It happened 4 years ago. Because of university, I moved to another city, and I used to go visit my family every 2 or 4 weeks. One of those times, I arrived to the bus station, and I didn't feel like getting on another bus to get home. I estimated that it would take me about 30 minutes if I walked, and it seemed like a good idea. Halfway through, I remembered that there was a street that would allow me to take less time. It was about 5 p.m., it wasn't dark, so I decided to go that way. I was feeling a little uneasy, so I put my cell phone and the money I had in a zippered bag in my jacket. I turned on the second block, and I was 3 blocks away from going back to the main road, where there were more people. I heard a car slowing down and began to regret the decision I made. I accelerated the pace, but the car was going next to me with the same pace. I turned to see the driver and I realized that he was watching me from up to down. I moved my backpack to block his eyes a little. I felt very uncomfortable. He just yelled, "Food," and accelerated. When I got to the next block, he was in front of a house with a cigarette. I immediately switched to the other sidewalk and he started laughing and went into the garage. That's when I heard, "Eat her." Turned around in confusion and realized that the man was laughing and holding the chains of 2 dogs. I heard their barking and it was the last sound. I ran and everything around seemed silent. I went into the first store I found, slammed the door, and the saleswoman asked me what was going on and even gave me some candy. She was so sweet. She told me that the bus that would take me to the direction I was going was about to pass by, and she accompanied me until I got on. I'll never forget that day, and I haven't walked down the street again. So, most of you probably turn off the lights when you leave a room, right? I mean, who doesn't? Apparently my husband. I love Steven to pieces, but it was just never a habit he formed as a kid. He's been good about it for the last few days, but that's probably because he finally started seeing the things too. When I was a kid, there were a lot of rules about keeping the house clean and making sure the lights were always off. I never thought much of it because most of my friends had similar rules in their houses. My family always knew about the things, but it might just be because ours had so many rules for generations. Have you ever seen the things I'm talking about? When you see something out of the corner of your eye, you turn really quick to see it, and it's gone. If not, you've probably got some pretty relaxed, whatever they are. My family has always had to do a lot to appease the things. My mom had it worse than her mom, but was still able to figure out the rules and keep up with them pretty easily. For the most part, the rules of my mom's things have seemed to be stuff we regularly do anyway. Always turn the lights off when you leave a room. Always keep internal doors open at least a crack. Yes, even the bathroom. Always leave a glass of water at least half full somewhere in the house. Always leave any window coverings at least partially open. Always leave an empty drawer or closet in the house. My mom taught me a good trick for this one. Get an old sewing table with lots of tiny drawers that are too small to effectively use. It still counts. When cooking meat, always put a small portion, uncooked, on a plate. Throw it away if left more than 24 hours without disappearing. This doesn't apply to pre-cooked meats, like deli meat. There do seem to be some other rules about cleaning, but I'm not sure what they might be. As a general rule of thumb, we always just keep the house clean and tidy. You'll know right away if you break any rules, but you'll start to see these things hanging around. At first, not too often, but the longer you break the rules, the more frequently they come and the sharper their outlines look. The rules aren't the same for every household. It totally depends on your specific things. At first, when my husband and I moved into our first house about a year ago, I never saw a single one. Those months before I glimpsed anything, I thought I had gotten off easy with some laid-back things. I started spotting them around October as it got darker during the days. Stephen would leave the lights on more frequently, so I think that's what triggered the things. I asked him to stop, and he did try to keep it in mind. But the things never stopped showing up. By November, I was starting to see how tall these things were. I could see more of their outlines. I was surprised at how human they looked. I'd never seen one so clearly before. I begged my husband to start following the rules, and I called my mom to see what all she had to do for hers. She gave me her list of rules, and I started following them. Nothing has gotten better. I've started being able to see really what the things look like. There are at least 4 of them. I only see them in periphery, but 2 look like older men, 1 looks like a young woman, and 1 is really hard to tell. Our cats have started being more protective of me. I'm sitting at my computer, one of them always be sitting behind my chair, staring at the doorway. I think they are trying to keep me safe from those things. Stephen dismissed all of this. He'd say he sees stuff out of the corner of his eyes, but that it is just paranoia or a mind trick. Or at least he did until last week. He was walking by my office and thought he saw me sitting there out of the corner of his eye. He called out to me and asked where I went for dinner. He was looking at this phone, so didn't really look at me. When he got to the kitchen and saw me standing there, he jumped and sort of skipped, half-jogged back to the office. There was no one in there. But the things don't exactly let you see them, so it's not surprising. Since then, he's been more wary of the things he's seen. He agrees with me now. He can see them too, and it's not a figment of our imagination. They've started getting close to us as well. They used to stay in different rooms or across the house. I'm now seeing them as I enter a room, and even one sitting beside me on the couch. We don't know if they will harm us, but they feel so wrong. I can't imagine that they're here to help. Even though Steven's starting to turning off the lights, I've been better about cleaning. I'm seeing them more and more. Their images are getting sharper and sharper. I'm starting to get really scared. Most distressingly, some things have started to move around in the house. I've never heard of these things doing something like that. Our latest theory is that there's a new rule. I hope we figure it out before we learn what these things are really capable of. This is definitely not the creepiest encounter I've experienced, but has stuck with me ever since. I, a 24-year-old female, used to go to a smaller university in my city where I worked as a bartender at the university bar. I also lived about 5 minutes away from campus, which was really convenient most of the time for naps between classes, but it lost its touch after this encounter. I usually worked day shifts on the days I didn't have any classes, and my best friend Dan, 23-year-old male, also worked with me there. We're really close, so he'd hang out during my shift before leaving me most nights. I've known Dan for years, and although a sweetheart, he is often quite oblivious. One day, while Dan was sitting at the bar and entertaining me during my shift, a guy sat next to him. The guy seemed normal around my age and wasn't bad looking either. He had blonde, disheveled hair and pretty sculpted muscles. He had also clearly come from a construction site because he had work boots and a hard helmet hanging from his belt. This wasn't unusual because we did have a lot of construction near us, and most construction workers in the area were also students at the university. I struck up a conversation with him, going through all of the customer service chit-chat that I was used to saying. When I was busy with another customer, he turned to Dan and started chatting with him, and they seemed to get on quite well. However, I could tell every now and again that the guy kept on sneaking glances at me, which was flattering the first couple of times and not uncommon as a female bartender. But the longer he did it, I realized there was something about him that was off when he looked at me. Rather than flirtatious, it was like he was watching me, watching exactly what I was doing, where I was going, how I walked, and how I greeted people. It was like he was surveilling me, sizing me up even. This really set me off for the obvious reasons, but also because I've dated a couple of abusive, controlling guys in the past, and the behavior seemed all too familiar. This was when he started to loop me in on him and Dan's conversation. He asked if we knew each other. Obvious answer, yes. We had been joking with each other when he arrived. He then asked how we met and kept asking personal questions about the two of us. I already saw him ramp up coming a mile away before he asked if we were dating. Dan laughed because we got that all the time. We're really close and very comfortable with each other platonically. Dan, being his oblivious self, said no and that he was dating his girlfriend, whom I adore, but that I was single. I immediately saw a shift in demeanor from the guy, who then turned to me to a smile. Although a pretty ordinary response, it sent chills down my spine. Many people would just think he was happy to be able to flirt with me freely, but the look in his eyes was telling. He was pleased because he wanted me to himself. Now, to take a step back, I know that seems like a slight overreaction, but trust me, I know that type of look, and it is frightening as all hell. After that, he started asking me personal questions specifically. I tried to go to the other customers and act busy to avoid them. Sometimes Dan would answer for me, and I swear the dumb kid thought he was wingmanning me, but God, he was so wrong. The guy asked me how old I was, what I was studying at school, where I was from, and all the other kinds of normal, but slightly invading questions as a stranger. Finally, Dan got up to get on shift, which meant that mine was almost over. Because the guy didn't really do anything out of the norm, I didn't pull Dan aside, but just patiently waited until I could just go and have a beer far away from this guy. As Dan went into the back, the guy turned his sole attention to me. He asked me what kind of shows I like to watch, and I answered half-heartedly as I cleaned behind the bar near him. Then, suddenly, I looked up and saw that his face was inches from mine. He had leaned up onto the bar, and I could literally smell him, and that's how close he was. He then asked me if I lived alone. I did at the time, but there was no way in hell I was telling this creep that. So I gulped, shook my head, and said I lived with 2 roommates. I thought adding 2 bodies would deter him. He leaned back down onto his seat and hummed. I saw a gleam in his eye that left me convinced he knew I was lying. At this point, I was shaking, which is really frustrating and unusual for me because I often keep up a rather stoic appearance when it comes to creeps. He seemed to notice and smiled. Then with a nod, he got up and put on his jacket. "See you later, Gima." And then he left, just in time for Dan to come out from the back. Dan saw immediately how shaken I was and asked what was wrong. I could barely respond because the thing was I never introduced myself to the guy. I'd forgotten to, and no one around had said my name. I know because I asked Dan if anyone had, but the guy knew my name. Unfortunately, that's not the end of this story. After that encounter, I was on high alert for about 4 days. Then I got busy with studying and life stuff, and it went to the back of my mind, but not for long. Suddenly, I started seeing the guy everywhere. In the hallways, near my classes, and at the bar. Coincidence turned into obvious intent, and I was freaked out. My university is small, and there was very little for me to do to avoid him. My biggest worry was that he had seen the way I walked home, so I started to ask people to drive me even though I lived 5 minutes away. None of my friends minded because they were very solid, which I'm very thankful for. After about 3 weeks of this, I had started to tell my friends, who then started a sort of barrier around me. I was never alone outside of class, and I always liked taken home by someone. I started to feel safer. I had some other stuff to deal with, so the guy sort of left my mind for a bit again. During that time, I bought a pair of old school yellow Vans because I'm a huge fan of retail therapy when I'm depressed or anxious. About 4 days later, I got the notice saying that they were out for delivery, and I was pretty excited. I don't usually buzz delivery guys into my building and often just let them leave a notice so I can pick the package up. But I decided to buzz the guy in this one time. Immediate gratification, or whatever you want to call it. Anyway, I had work late and was dropped off home by a friend around 10 p.m. I was exhausted, but still stoked to get my Vans and have a small positive in my life. But when I rounded the corner to my door, my package wasn't waiting for me. This was weird because they always bring your box to your door when it's a private courier, if they're buzzed into the building. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe the delivery guy hadn't found my door number, or maybe he delivered it to the wrong apartment. I unlocked my door, which seemed to stick a little, which was also weird, but I shrugged that off too. But when I opened my door, something immediately felt off. Nothing was out of place, but felt like it. I cautiously stepped into my apartment, gripping my keys between my fingers. My other hand was holding my phone tight, just on the verge of pressing down my emergency call button. That's when I turned to the one thing that wasn't there when I left that morning. My package is sitting on my kitchen counter with a note next to it. I started to panic and raced through my apartment, wheeling my keys like a pair of claws. My apartment was small, so it was rather easy to sweep it. No one was there. Just me, my Vans, and the note. Going into survivor mode, I slammed my door, locked it, and bolted it, and stuck a chair under the handle for good measure. I checked every window to make sure they were locked and that my patio door was as well, which was a sliding glass door. That's when I found the second thing out of place. The security bar I stuck behind my patio door was under my couch, where you would have had to been crawling to find it. It was most definitely stuck behind my patio door when I left that morning. As you can imagine, this freaked me out even more. But I was just glad the bar wasn't broken. I placed it back as tight as possible, and then went straight towards my kitchen counter, where the bastard had left me my present. My package was open, and my first thought was, hey, that's illegal, before I reminded myself that the guy had literally just broken into my home. My shoes were intact, basically untouched. Next to the box was a handwritten note on one of the sticky pads from the desk in the other room. It read, "Small apartment for 3 people. Enjoy your Vans." Now, I'd like to tell you that I called the police and that I got everything sorted out, but that's not how the story ends. In fact, all I did was cry the whole night and have around 5 panic attacks. The police can't really do much when the guy hasn't done anything malicious. And there was no way for me to trace all of this back to one guy I didn't even know and haven't seen since. However, the school term ended right after this, and I didn't have to go to campus until September. I also immediately moved into with my 2 sisters and brother-in-law, so he had very little ways to bother me after that. But for the love of God, creepy stalker guy, let's never meet again. This happened last fall when the weather was cooling down but wasn't too cold. I was going through a breakup and having a rough time in life in general, and I was seeking ways to become more independent and grow myself. So I decided to run to a park 30 minutes away from my city to enjoy the sunset. This was in November, so the park was almost completely empty. I passed 2 cars while driving in. One was empty, but I noticed that the second car I passed was parked in a parking lot with the headlights on. I couldn't see how many people were inside, but I instantly got a bad feeling. Whatever I told myself, I was being silly and that I shouldn't let stupid fear prevent me from enjoying the sunset. So I drove all the way into the park and parked my car in the parking lot where the road ended. I still had a nasty feeling when I parked, but the sun was still up. It wasn't dark, and I just wanted to get out for 5 minutes and hike up the trail to sit outside. I told myself there was nothing to worry about, and I didn't need to be suspicious unless the car followed me to the parking lot. I waited a couple minutes and nothing happened, so I left my car and headed up the trail. I, honest to God, did not go far. I walked for maybe 2 minutes up to a bench at an overlook and sat for 5 or 10 minutes. It started to get a little bit darker since the sun had gone down, think like early dusk. So I turned around and walked the 2 minutes back down the path to the parking lot. There was a little bend in the path before it got to the lot, and as soon as I rounded the bend, my stomach fell. The car was sitting between the trailhead and my car. I can't even describe just how terrifying that feeling was. I knew something was wrong in that moment. I called my mom, and then I called the police and asked them to come to my car because I didn't feel safe returning to my car alone. For reference, I'm a short and skinny girl. After speaking to the police operator, I called my mom again and stayed on the phone with her for 30 minutes, waiting up the trail for an officer. Those minutes were some of the most dreadful minutes I've ever experienced. It was a park, so there were coyotes howling nearby and an owl. It was getting darker every second, and I was just staring down the path waiting for whoever was in the car to decide to come looking for me. After felt like an eternity, an officer finally arrived. I saw his lights and finally headed back down to trail to my car. Sure enough, there was a man sitting in the driver's side of the car in the lot. The officer told me the man was just sleeping. I'm not so sure. I passed his car while I was driving, and he followed my car to the parking lot I was in. There are plenty of empty lots to sleep in if someone decided to sleep in their car in a park, which I think is illegal anyway. I don't think they would choose to park right next to another car. Not to mention, I had only been away from my car for 15 minutes at most, and he parked between the trailhead and my car, so he would see me return to my car and I would have to pass him before I could go into my vehicle. The whole situation scared me from ever going to the park alone again. The stranger in the woods, let's not meet. Yay, you made it to the end, good job. Yay!